Hello, and welcome back to the Narrative Reading Bible Podcast. My name is Jessica. Today, we are continuing our reading of the Book of Leviticus with pages 170 to 180 in Book 1, Paths to Promise. Enjoy today's reading. God bless.
Then the Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the Israelites and say, anyone who presents a peace offering to the Lord must bring it as his sacrifice to the Lord. With his own hands he is to bring the offerings made by fire to the Lord. He shall bring the fat, together with the breast, and wave the breast as a wave, offering before the Lord. The priest is to burn the fat on the altar, but the breast belongs to Aaron and his sons. And you are to give the right thigh to the priest as a contribution from your peace offering. The son of Aaron, who presents the blood and fat of the peace offering, shall have the right thigh as a portion. I have taken from the sons of Israel the breast of the wave offering and the thigh of the contribution of their peace offerings, and I have given them to Aaron the priest and his sons as a permanent portion from the sons of Israel. This is the portion of the offerings made by fire to the Lord for Aaron and his sons, since the day they were presented to serve the Lord as priests. On the day they were anointed, the Lord commanded that this be given them by the sons of Israel. It is a permanent portion for the generations to come. This is the law of the burnt offering, the grain offering, the sin offering, the guilt offering, the ordination offering, and the peace offering, which the Lord gave Moses on Mount Sinai on the day he commanded the Israelites to present their offerings to the Lord in the wilderness of Sinai. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Take Aaron and his sons, their garments, the anointing oil, the bull of the sin offering, the 2 rams, and the basket of unleavened bread, and assemble the whole congregation at the entrance to the tent of meeting." So Moses did as the Lord had commanded him, and the assembly gathered at the entrance to the tent of meeting. And Moses said to them, "This is what the Lord has commanded to be done." Then Moses presented Aaron and his sons, and washed them with water. He put the tunic on Aaron, tied the sash around him, clothed him with the robe, and put the ephod on him. He tied the woven band of the ephod around him and fastened it to him. Then he put the breastpiece on him, and placed the Urim and Thummim in the breastpiece. Moses also put the turban on Aaron's head, and set the gold plate, the holy diadem, on the front of the turban, as the Lord had commanded him. Next, Moses took the anointing oil and anointed the tabernacle and everything in it, and so he consecrated them. He sprinkled some of the oil on the altar 7 times, anointing the altar and all its utensils, and the basin with its stand, to consecrate them. He also poured some of the anointing oil on Aaron's head, and anointed him to consecrate him. Then Moses presented Aaron's sons, put tunics on them, wrapped sashes around them, and tied headbands on them, just as the Lord had commanded him. Moses then brought the bull near for the sin offering, and Aaron and his sons laid their hands on its head. Moses slaughtered the bull, took some of the blood, and applied it with his finger to all 4 horns of the altar, purifying the altar. He poured out the rest of the blood at the base of the altar and consecrated it so that atonement could be made on it. Moses also took all the fat that was on the entrails, the lobe of the liver, and both kidneys and their fat, and burned it all on the altar. But the bull, with its hide, flesh, and dung, he burned outside the camp, as the Lord had commanded him. Then Moses presented the ram for the burnt offering, and Aaron and his sons laid their hands on its head. Moses slaughtered the ram, and sprinkled the blood on all sides of the altar. He cut the ram into pieces, and burned the head, the pieces, and the fat. He washed the entrails and legs with water, and burned the entire ram on the altar as a burnt offering, a pleasing aroma, an offering made by fire to the Lord, just as the Lord had commanded Moses. After that, Moses presented the other ram, the ram of ordination, and Aaron and his sons laid their hands on its head. Moses slaughtered the ram and took some of its blood and put it on Aaron's right earlobe, on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot. Moses also presented Aaron's sons, and put some of the blood on their right earlobes, on the thumbs of their right hands, and on the big toes of their right feet. Then he sprinkled the blood on all sides of the altar. And Moses took the fat tail, all the fat that was on the entrails, the lobe of the liver, and both kidneys with their fat, as well as the right thigh. And from the basket of unleavened bread that was before the Lord, he took 1 cake of unleavened bread, 1 cake of bread made with oil, and 1 wafer, and he placed them on the fat portions and on the right thigh. He put all these in the hands of Aaron and his sons, and waved them before the Lord as a wave offering. Then Moses took these from their hands and burned them on the altar with the burnt offering. This was an ordination offering, a pleasing aroma, an offering made by fire to the Lord. He also took the breast, Moses' portion of the ram of ordination, and waved it before the Lord as a wave offering, as the Lord had commanded him. Next, Moses took some of the anointing oil and some of the blood that was on the altar, and sprinkled them on Aaron and his garments, and on his sons and their garments. So he consecrated Aaron and his garments, as well as Aaron's sons and their garments. And Moses said to Aaron and his sons, "Boil the meat at the entrance to the tent of meeting, and eat it there with the bread that is in the basket of ordination offerings, as I commanded, saying, Aaron and his sons are to eat it. Then you must burn up the remainder of the meat and bread. You must not go outside the entrance to the tent of meeting for 7 days, until the days of your ordination are complete, for it will take 7 days to ordain you. What has been done today has been commanded by the Lord in order to make atonement on your behalf. You must remain at the entrance to the tent of meeting day and night for 7 days, and keep the Lord's charge, so that you will not die, for this is what I have been commanded." So Aaron and his sons did everything the Lord had commanded through Moses. On the 8th day, Moses summoned Aaron and his sons and the elders of Israel. He said to Aaron, "Take for yourself a young bull for a sin offering, and a ram for a burnt offering, both without blemish, and present them before the Lord. Then speak to the Israelites and say, Take a male goat for a sin offering, a calf and a lamb, both a year old and without blemish, for a burnt offering, an ox and a ram for a peace offering to sacrifice before the Lord, and a grain offering mixed with oil. For today the Lord will appear to you." So they took what Moses had commanded to the front of the tent of meeting, and the whole congregation drew near and stood before the Lord. And Moses said, "This is what the Lord has commanded you to do, so that the glory of the Lord may appear to you." Then Moses said to Aaron, "Approach the altar and sacrifice your sin offering and your burnt offering to make atonement for yourself and for the people, and sacrifice the people's offering to make atonement for them, as the Lord has commanded." So Aaron approached the altar and slaughtered the calf as a sin offering for himself. The sons of Aaron brought the blood to him, and he dipped his finger in the blood and applied it to the horns of the altar. And he poured out the rest of the blood at the base of the altar. On the altar he burned the fat, the kidneys, and the lobe of the liver from the sin offering, as the Lord had commanded Moses. But he burned up the flesh and the hide outside the camp. Then Aaron slaughtered the burnt offering. His sons brought him the blood, and he sprinkled it on all sides of the altar. They brought him the burnt offering piece by piece, including the head, and he burned them on the altar. He washed the entrails and the legs, and burned them atop the burnt offering on the altar. Aaron then presented the people's offering. He took the male goat for the people's sin offering, slaughtered it, and offered it for sin like the first one. He presented the burnt offering and offered it according to the ordinance. Next he presented the grain offering, took a handful of it, and burned it on the altar in addition to the morning's burnt offering. Then he slaughtered the ox and the ram as the people's peace offering. His sons brought him the blood, and he sprinkled it on all sides of the altar. They also brought the fat portions from the ox and the ram, the fat tail, the fat covering the entrails, the kidneys, and the lobe of the liver, and placed these on the breasts. Aaron burned the fat portions on the altar, but he waved the breasts and the right thigh as a wave offering before the Lord, as Moses had commanded. Aaron lifted up his hands toward the people and blessed them. And having made the sin offering, the burnt offering, and the peace offering, he stepped down. Moses and Aaron then entered the tent of meeting. When they came out, they blessed the people, and the glory of the Lord appeared to all the people. Fire came out from the presence of the Lord and consumed the burnt offering and the fat portions on the altar. And when all the people saw it, they shouted for joy and fell face down. Now Aaron's sons Nadab and Abihu took their censers, put fire in them and added incense, and offered unauthorized fire before the Lord, contrary to his command. So fire came out from the presence of the Lord and consumed them, and they died in the presence of the Lord. Then Moses said to Aaron, "This is what the Lord meant when he said, 'To those who come near me, I will show my holiness, and in the sight of all the people, I will reveal my glory.'" But Aaron remained silent. Moses summoned Mishael and Elzaphan, sons of Aaron's uncle Uzziel, and said to them, "Come here, carry the bodies of your cousins outside the camp, away from the front of the sanctuary." So they came forward and carried them, still in their tunics, outside the camp, as Moses had directed. Then Moses said to Aaron and his sons, Eleazar and Ithamar, "Do not let your hair become disheveled, and do not tear your garments, or else you will die, and the Lord will be angry with the whole congregation. But your brothers, the whole house of Israel, may mourn on account of the fire that the Lord has ignited. You shall not go outside the entrance to the tent of meeting, or you will die, for the Lord's anointing oil is on you." So they did as Moses instructed. Then the Lord said to Aaron, "You and your sons are not to drink wine or strong drink when you enter the tent of meeting, or else you will die. This is a permanent statute for the generations to come. You must distinguish between the holy and the common, between the clean and the unclean, so that you may teach the Israelites all the statutes that the Lord has given them through Moses." And Moses said to Aaron and his remaining sons, Eleazar and Ithamar, "Take the grain offering that remains from the offerings made by fire to the Lord, and eat it without leaven beside the altar, because it is most holy. You shall eat it in a holy place, because it is your share and your son's share of the offerings made by fire to the Lord, for this is what I have been commanded. And you and your sons and daughters may eat the breast of the wave, offering and the thigh of the contribution in a ceremonially clean place, because these portions have been assigned to you and your children from the peace offerings of the sons of Israel. They are to bring the thigh of the contribution and the breast of the wave offering, together with the fat portions of the offerings made by fire, to wave as a wave offering before the Lord. It will belong permanently to you and your children, as the Lord has commanded." Later Moses searched carefully for the goat of the sin offering, and behold, it had been burned up. He was angry with Eleazar and Ithamar, Aaron's remaining sons, and asked, "Why didn't you eat the sin offering in the holy place? For it is most holy. It was given to you to take away the guilt of the congregation by making atonement for them before the Lord. Since its blood was not brought inside the holy place, you should have eaten it in the sanctuary area, as I commanded." But Aaron replied to Moses, "Behold, this very day they presented their sin offering and their burnt offering before the Lord. Since these things have happened to me, if I had eaten the sin offering today, would it have been acceptable in the sight of the Lord?" And when Moses heard this explanation, he was satisfied. The Lord spoke again to Moses and Aaron, telling them, "Say to the Israelites, of all the beasts of the earth, these ones you may eat. You may eat any animal that has a split hoof completely divided and that chews the cud. But of those that only chew the cud or only have a divided hoof, you are not to eat the following: the camel, though it chews the cud, does not have a divided hoof. It is unclean for you. The rock badger, though it chews the cud, does not have a divided hoof. It is unclean for you. The rabbit, though it chews the cud, does not have a divided hoof. It is unclean for you. And the pig, though it has a split hoof completely divided, does not chew the cud. It is unclean for you. You must not eat their meat or touch their carcasses. They are unclean for you. Of all the creatures that live in the water, whether in the seas or in the streams, you may eat anything with fins and scales. But the following among all the teeming life and creatures in the water are detestable to you: everything in the seas or streams that does not have fins and scales. They shall be an abomination to you. You must not eat their meat, and you must detest their carcasses. Everything in the water that does not have fins and scales shall be detestable to you. Additionally, you are to detest the following birds, and they must not be eaten because they are detestable: the eagle, the bearded vulture, the black vulture, the kite, any kind of falcon, any kind of raven, the ostrich, the screech owl, the gull, any kind of hawk, the little owl, the cormorant, the great owl, the white owl, the desert owl, the osprey, the stork, any kind of heron, the hoopoe and the bat. All flying insects that walk on all fours are detestable to you. However, you may eat the following kinds of flying insects that walk on all fours, those having jointed legs above their feet for hopping on the ground. Of these, you may eat any kind of locust, katydid, cricket, or grasshopper. All other flying insects that have 4 legs are detestable to you. These creatures will make you unclean. Whoever touches their carcasses will be unclean until evening, and whoever picks up one of their carcasses must wash his clothes, and he will be unclean until evening. Every animal with hooves not completely divided or that does not chew the cud is unclean for you. Whoever touches any of them will be unclean. All the 4-footed animals that walk on their paws are unclean for you. Whoever touches their carcasses will be unclean until evening. And anyone who picks up a carcass must wash his clothes, and he will be unclean until evening. They are unclean for you. The following creatures that move along the ground are unclean for you: the mole, the mouse, any kind of great lizard, the gecko, the monitor lizard, the common lizard, the skink, and the chameleon. These animals are unclean for you among all the crawling creatures. Whoever touches them when they are dead shall be unclean until evening. When one of them dies and falls on something, that article becomes unclean. Any article of wood, clothing, leather, sackcloth, or any implement used for work must be rinsed with water and will remain unclean until evening. Then it will be clean. If any of them falls into a clay pot, everything in it will be unclean. You must break the pot. Any food coming into contact with water from that pot will be unclean, and any drink in such a container will be unclean. Anything upon which one of their carcasses falls will be unclean. If it is an oven or cooking pot, it must be smashed. It is unclean and will remain unclean for you. Nevertheless, a spring or cistern containing water will remain clean, but one who touches a carcass in it will be unclean. If a carcass falls on any seed for sowing, the seed is clean. But if water has been put on the seed and a carcass falls on it, it is unclean for you. If an animal that you may eat dies, anyone who touches the carcass will be unclean until evening. Whoever eats from the carcass must wash his clothes and will be unclean until evening. And anyone who picks up the carcass must wash his clothes and will be unclean until evening. Every creature that moves along the ground is detestable. It must not be eaten. Do not eat any creature that moves along the ground, whether it crawls on its belly or walks on 4 or more feet, for such creatures are detestable. Do not defile yourselves by any crawling creature. Do not become unclean or defiled by them. For I am the Lord your God. Consecrate yourselves, therefore, and be holy, because I am holy. You must not defile yourselves by any creature that crawls along the ground. For I am the Lord, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt, so that I would be your God. Therefore be holy, because I am holy. This is the law regarding animals, birds, all living creatures that move in the water, and all creatures that crawl along the ground. You must distinguish between the unclean and the clean, between animals that may be eaten and those that may not. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Say to the Israelites, a woman who becomes pregnant and gives birth to a son will be unclean for 7 days, as she is during the days of her menstruation. And on the 8th day, the flesh of the boy's foreskin is to be circumcised. The woman shall continue in purification from her bleeding for 33 days. She must not touch anything sacred or go into the sanctuary until the days of her purification are complete. If, however, she gives birth to a daughter, the woman will be unclean for 2 weeks, as she is during her menstruation. Then she must continue in purification from her bleeding for 66 days. When the days of her purification are complete, whether for a son or for a daughter, she is to bring to the priest at the entrance to the tent of meeting a year-old lamb for a burnt offering, and a young pigeon or a turtle dove for a sin offering. And the priest will present them before the Lord and make atonement for her, and she shall be ceremonially cleansed from her flow of blood. This is the law for a woman giving birth, whether to a male or to a female. But if she cannot afford a lamb, she shall bring 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, one for a burnt offering and the other for a sin offering. Then the priest will make atonement for her, and she will be clean." Then the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "When someone has a swelling or rash or bright spot on his skin that could become an infectious skin disease, he must be brought to Aaron the priest, or to one of his sons who is a priest. The priest is to examine the infection on his skin, and if the hair in the infection has turned white, and the sore appears to be deeper than the skin, it is a skin disease. After the priest examines him, he must pronounce him unclean. If, however, the spot on his skin is white and does not appear to be deeper than the skin, and the hair in it has not turned white, the priest shall isolate the infected person for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest is to re-examine him, and if he sees that the infection is unchanged and has not spread on the skin, the priest must isolate him for another 7 days. The priest will examine him again on the 7th day, and if the sore has faded and has not spread on the skin, the priest shall pronounce him clean. It is a rash. The person must wash his clothes and be clean. But if the rash spreads further on his skin after he has shown himself to the priest for his cleansing, he must present himself again to the priest. The priest will re-examine him, and if the rash has spread on the skin, the priest must pronounce him unclean. He has a skin disease. When anyone develops a skin disease, he must be brought to the priest. The priest will examine him, and if there is a white swelling on the skin that has turned the hair white, and there is raw flesh in the swelling, it is a chronic skin disease, and the priest must pronounce him unclean. He need not isolate him, for he is unclean. But if the skin disease breaks out all over his skin, so that it covers all the skin of the infected person from head to foot, as far as the priest can see, the priest shall examine him. And if the disease has covered his entire body, he is to pronounce the infected person clean. Since it has all turned white, he is clean. But whenever raw flesh appears on someone, he will be unclean. When the priest sees the raw flesh, he must pronounce him unclean. The raw flesh is unclean. It is a skin disease. But if the raw flesh changes and turns white, he must go to the priest. The priest will re-examine him, and if the infection has turned white, the priest is to pronounce the infected person clean. then he is clean. When a boil appears on someone's skin and it heals, and a white swelling or a reddish-white spot develops where the boil was, he must present himself to the priest. The priest shall examine it, and if it appears to be beneath the skin, and the hair in it has turned white, the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a diseased infection that has broken out in the boil. But when the priest examines it, if there is no white hair in it, and it is not beneath the skin and is faded, the priest shall isolate him for 7 days. If it spreads any further on the skin, the priest must pronounce him unclean. It is an infection. But if the spot remains unchanged and does not spread, it is only the scar from the boil, and the priest shall pronounce him clean. When there is a burn on someone's skin, and the raw area of the burn becomes reddish-white or white, the priest must examine it. If the hair in the spot has turned white, and the spot appears to be deeper than the skin, it is a disease that has broken out in the burn. The priest must pronounce him unclean. It is a diseased infection. But if the priest examines it, and there is no white hair in the spot, and it is not beneath the skin, but has faded, the priest shall isolate him for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest is to re-examine him, and if it has spread further on the skin, the priest must pronounce him unclean. It is a diseased infection. But if the spot is unchanged, and has not spread on the skin, but has faded, it is a swelling from the burn, and the priest is to pronounce him clean, for it is only the scar from the burn. If a man or woman has an infection on the head or chin, the priest shall examine the infection, and if it appears to be deeper than the skin and the hair in it is yellow and thin, the priest must pronounce him unclean. It is a scaly outbreak, an infectious disease of the head or chin. But if the priest examines the scaly infection, and it does not appear to be deeper than the skin, and there is no black hair in it, the priest shall isolate the infected person for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest is to re-examine the infection, and if the scaly outbreak has not spread, and there is no yellow hair in it, and it does not appear to be deeper than the skin, then the person must shave himself, except for the scaly area. Then the priest shall isolate him for another 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest shall examine the scaly outbreak, and if it has not spread on the skin, and does not appear to be deeper than the skin, the priest is to pronounce him clean. He must wash his clothes, and he will be clean. If, however, the scaly outbreak spreads further on the skin after his cleansing, the priest is to examine him, and if the scaly outbreak has spread on the skin, the priest need not look for yellow hair. The person is unclean. If, however, in his sight the scaly outbreak is unchanged and black hair has grown in it, then it has healed. He is clean, and the priest is to pronounce him clean. When a man or a woman has white spots on the skin, the priest shall examine them, and if the spots are dull white, it is a harmless rash that has broken out on the skin. The person is clean. Now if a man loses his hair and is bald, he is still clean. Or if his hairline recedes and he is bald on his forehead, he is still clean. But if there is a reddish-white sore on the bald head or forehead, it is an infectious disease breaking out on it. The priest is to examine him, and if the swelling of the infection on his bald head or forehead is reddish-white like a skin disease, the man is diseased. He is unclean. The priest must pronounce him unclean because of the infection on his head. A diseased person must wear torn clothes and let his hair hang loose, and he must cover his mouth and cry out, "Unclean! Unclean!" As long as he has the infection, he remains unclean. He must live alone in a place outside the camp. If any fabric is contaminated with mildew, any wool or linen garment, any weave or knit of linen or wool, or any article of leather, and if the mark in the fabric, leather, weave, knit, or leather article is green or red, then it is contaminated with mildew and must be shown to the priest. And the priest is to examine the mildew and isolate the contaminated fabric for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest shall re-examine it, and if the mildew has spread in the fabric, weave, knit, or leather, then regardless of how it is used, it is a harmful mildew. The article is unclean. He is to burn the fabric, weave, or knit, whether the contaminated item is wool or linen or leather. Since the mildew is harmful, the article must be burned up. But when the priest re-examines it, if the mildew has not spread in the fabric, weave, knit, or leather article, the priest is to order the contaminated article to be washed and isolated for another 7 days. After it has been washed, the priest is to re-examine it, and if the mildewed article has not changed in appearance, it is unclean. Even though the mildew has not spread, you must burn it, whether the rot is on the front or back. If the priest examines it, and the mildew has faded after it has been washed, he must cut the contaminated section out of the fabric, leather, weave, or knit. But if it reappears in the fabric, weave, or knit, or on any leather article, it is spreading. You must burn the contaminated article. If the mildew disappears from the fabric, weave, or knit, or any leather article after washing, then it is to be washed again, and it will be clean. This is the law concerning a mildew contamination in wool or linen fabric, weave, or knit, or any leather article, for pronouncing it clean or unclean. Then the Lord said to Moses, "This is the law for the one afflicted with a skin disease on the day of his cleansing, when he is brought to the priest. The priest is to go outside the camp to examine him, and if the skin disease of the afflicted person has healed, the priest shall order that 2 live clean birds, cedar wood, scarlet yarn, and hyssop be brought for the one to be cleansed. Then the priest shall command that one of the birds be slaughtered over fresh water in a clay pot, and he is to take the live bird together with the cedar wood, scarlet yarn, and hyssop, and dip them into the blood of the bird that was slaughtered over the fresh water. 7 times he shall sprinkle the one to be cleansed of the skin disease. Then he shall pronounce him clean, and release the live bird into the open field. The one being cleansed must wash his clothes, shave off all his hair, and bathe with water. Then he will be ceremonially clean. Afterward he may enter the camp, but he must remain outside his tent for 7 days. On the 7th day he must shave off all his hair, his head, his beard, his eyebrows, and the rest of his hair. He must wash his clothes and bathe himself with water, and he will be clean. On the 8th day, he is to bring 2 unblemished male lambs, an unblemished ewe lamb a year old, a grain offering of 3/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with olive oil, and 1 log of olive oil. The priest who performs the cleansing shall present the one to be cleansed, together with these offerings, before the Lord at the entrance to the tent of meeting. Then the priest is to take one of the male lambs and present it as a guilt offering, along with the log of olive oil, and he must wave them as a wave offering before the Lord. Then he is to slaughter the lamb in the sanctuary area, where the sin offering and burnt offering are slaughtered. Like the sin offering, the guilt offering belongs to the priest. It is most holy,